It's Tuesday, the 6th of February, and I have not started any of my books for the Nonfiction Booktube Prize yet, but I did pick up 3 yesterday. Surprisingly, the audio copy of Emperors of Rome, the new Mary Beard, came in early on my Libby yesterday. I just have to finish the other audiobook I'm reading right now. I'm hoping to start Emperor of Rome this week. Today, we're going to start August Wilson by Patty Hartigan, because I think this one is going to be the second hardest for me to read because it's biography. And I know from past judging rounds that biographies are a slog for reading, but sometimes I like them. Hoping that this one works for me. And then the other book that has already come in is actually Sure, I'll Join Your Cult by Maria Bamford. I was still hoping to get the audiobook of this, but that has like a 4-month wait because Minnesota. The interesting thing about this is it could be really good or it could be really bad. It's like a humor memoir, and I am a weirdo who doesn't like normal humor, but also this particular comedian talks a lot about what it costs to actually do things and finances and is very open about that. So that is very intriguing to me. And also she's from Minnesota, which gives her a bit of an advantage. So I will start this. After I finish this, I'm going to try to get 100 pages read this week. I just want to finish this one before March. Okay, just a very quick update before I go into work. I am 1 chapter into the August Wilson biography, and I'm feeling hopeful. I think the author is writing in a more storytelling, conversational tone. The other thing that's interesting to me as I read more biographies is this question of where the author decides to start. This author, and also the author of the Sylvia Plath biography that I read several years ago, choose to start before the birth of the main person the book is about. Specifically, this one 2 or 3 generations ahead of time, and thinking about why that was chosen as a starting place. I think the author wants to establish 2 generations back who was the great-grandparent of this man. That is what I read last night. I think maybe in the 2nd chapter, August Wilson will be born. We will see. Today, I started listening to Emperor of Rome by Mary Beard, and it'll be interesting. I definitely can't listen to this when I'm sleepy. I tried that last night. Too many Roman names. I do think Beard is writing this in an open enough way that someone who barely knows anything about the emperors of Rome can get something out of it. I'm hoping that this book gives me something to talk about with the men who dream of Rome. That is how I'm feeling right now. I'm going to go to work. Probably won't get anything read at work, but I am trying to read at least 1 chapter of the August Wilson biography a day so that I can finish by the end of February. This is just a little status update. On the 12th, I finished the 3rd chapter, so I'm this much in, and y'all, I thought that August Wilson wrote A Raisin in the Sun. I mean, I think if I had remembered, at some point I obviously knew it differently because we read it in school and I would have known the author then. But I'm reading this book and there comes along a different playwright writing A Raisin in the Sun and me feeling like a true clown. Obviously, I need to keep reading. It's Saturday morning. I'm at my sister's new house. You can tell very little unpacking has happened for me this morning because instead I've been snugging with our little foster dog and Renee's dog. I did finish the 6th chapter of the August Wilson biography. Good news. I'm actually really liking this. It's really working for me. It's written in a really, accessible conversational way. Also, in chapter 6, we find out, surprise to me, he spent some significant time in the Twin Cities, living in St. Paul. It was a huge part of his formative playwright years where he was honing his craft. Some of his early work was staged here. All of that was in the 6th chapter. And I was like, wow, this is super interesting. Now I want to read a book that's about development of the theater scene in the Twin Cities. Is it related to this book? Only tangentially, but I think I'm going to email a librarian and ask if they know of anything like that exists. This is going much better than I anticipated. I'm about 25% in. I hit page 100. On the other hand, I am about 30% in to the audiobook of Emperor of Rome by Mary Beard. I don't necessarily have anything in particular to say about that. It's not going badly. It's not going super well. It's just kind of going. I don't think the book is bad by any means, but a lot of my personal enjoyment is from listening to it and imagining what my head has decided are Rome bros reading it. The way that Mary Beard is saying, hey, this thing that you think you know, or this thing that has often been said is really not what we know to be true. So that is interesting. I don't know if audiobook is the best way to read that book. In particular, I'm so sorry, Mary Beard, but I do not like your narration. I am a third of the way into this judging, and I have not even finished the 2 books that I've started. So one of my goals today is to try to get much further through one or both of these. I have picked up the other books that I'm reading for this, and Eve is much longer than I thought it would be. So I really need to accelerate my reading, and that one I'm probably going to do last because I think it's going to tank my reading. I'm really worried about that one. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. I was pleasantly surprised about August Wilson, a biography. Biographies being my nemesis. That's it for now. I hope that you are also enjoying the reading you're doing these days. Okay, quick update as I am woefully behind in both reading and updating and walking the dogs this morning, so it has to be fast. Just wanted to show you that I did get the last 3 in. Wifedom, The Exceptions, and Eve, which we'll see. I was listening to Emperor of Rome as I got dressed this morning. What I'm struggling with right now is the 4th chapter in Emperor of Rome, because it is about the structure of the palaces, and I am so sorry, I do not care. Do not care about the structure of the palaces, and you have yet to prove to me why I should care beyond if I were actually a person into Rome, I probably would care, but I don't. So that chapter is a struggle for me. Also, it's like an 1.5 hour long chapter. All these chapters are very long, and I don't necessarily feel they shouldn't be as long as they are because I understand what Mary Beard is going for. But it does make it hard for listening to the audiobook. I have to go to work today, but I'll see y'all later. It is Thursday the 22nd. I'm wearing my Thinking Thursday sweatshirt. I'm hanging out with the dogs at my very late lunch. I was listening to Emperor of Rome. I'm now 6 chapters in. I just finished the 6th chapter, and I have 4 days to finish 5 more hours, so I need to listen to a lot more today. I just wanted to note this one issue I have with it before I forget it. I think this is going to end up being 3 stars for me, not because it's bad, but because it's good, but I'm not actually a Rome enthusiast, and I think maybe it'd be better if I was more of a Rome enthusiast. That's beyond the point. The one thing that has bothered me a little bit, when Mary Beard is talking about enslaved people in Rome, or otherwise people who are not in positions of power, not the emperor, she doesn't always make a distinction between them maybe having a choice to be in the positions they're put in and not having a choice to be in the positions they're put in. I don't think we can necessarily know in super detail all of these things from this perspective, but I would appreciate just like a little shout out when she talks about a certain emperor who so mourned his boy slave lover who drowned in Egypt, that he tried to make him into a god and built all these things and whatever. Mary Beard never says we can't know from that slave's perspective what the relationship was like. It's not at length. She doesn't really go on and on about great love affairs or anything, but it would just be nice to acknowledge we can't know. When you're talking about this relationship, we can't know what this relationship was actually like from both ends. That's how I'm feeling. Chapter 6 was about letters. I'm not sure yet what chapter 7 will be about, but chapter 6 ended kind of talking about taxes and how like taxes might be the reason that like a huge number of people were made into Roman citizens, which is kind of interesting. Okay, chapter 7 is about like free time. So gladiatorial combat has come up and gladiators and all of that Colosseum nonsense. It reminded me, to my previous point, also when Mary Beard is talking about rumors that one of the emperor's wives had affairs with gladiators. There's no acknowledgement of the power imbalance there and the fact that it may have been an affair, a rumored affair for the wife of the emperor, but it was not necessarily that for the gladiators. Apologies if you are into Rome and already knew this. Allegedly, Emperor Nero really wanted to be an actor. During his performances, if you fell asleep or tried to leave, he would punish you, and women would end up giving birth in their seats because they were not able to not come to these performances. Okay. Sorry if I just share all of the fun anecdotes with you and you end up reading this book in the vein of Nero enjoying acting. The story goes that he used to put on a disguise and go out in the streets at night and fight with people. Apparently, he allegedly doing this out on the streets, and he hit on like a random nobody senator's wife, and the random nobody senator beat him up so badly that he had a black eye, and he got in trouble for that. And allegedly, in one of the accounts, the reason the senator got in trouble is because he wrote an apology letter for beating up Nero, and he wasn't supposed to acknowledge that he saw and knew who Nero was. Hello, I am being held hostage by the dogs on the couch. Sorry for my hand. Listening to the last 2.5 hours of Emperor of Rome. Finally, Mary Beard said something in relating a probably false anecdote about one of the emperors gifting someone a slave and money to take care of that slave. She did mention the idea of gifting humans to other humans is abhorrent. Anyway, if you're a person who actually does know things about Rome and you're just like yelling at me through your screen right now, please feel free to correct me in the comments. All right, bye.
Just really quickly, I have just finished Emperor of Rome. I'm in my car because I'm going to go drive to see Tenet in a movie theater. My earlier thoughts stand. I think for me personally, it's a 3-star book. Mary Beard fans, please tell me why I'm wrong below. These are my reading buddies today.
It is Saturday, March 2nd. I need to pick up the pace reading because, as you might have noticed, I only finished one of the 3 books I wanted to finish in February. I'm feeling good. I have about 100 pages left of the August Wilson biography, so I wanted to just give you an update before I settle in with these snuggly dogs. I am actually really enjoying this so far. I think this is going better for me personally than Emperor of Rome did. I think that would vary significantly if you actually cared more about Rome. I'm finding this very interesting. I think the author did a good job taking me through different phases and different plays or works of Wilson's life, and also introducing more elements of who Wilson is and big collaborations that he had and didn't. I think it's very well written and very interesting so far. Wilson has now moved out of Minnesota at this point in his life, so the Minnesota connection is mostly gone, RIP. That is what I'm reading right now. After I finish this, I think I'm going to try to Sure I'll Join Your Cult, but I might wait on that one in hopes that the audiobook magically comes in before the end of the month. So if I don't do that, I'll probably do either The Exceptions or Wifedom. Y'all, the plot thickens. I think the answer is teachers would not have felt comfortable teaching August Wilson's plays, largely white teachers to largely white classrooms, but a St. Paul theater that had a relationship with August Wilson staged a bunch of his plays, according to this book, they were at least planning to stage them, while I was in middle/high school. And yet we never talked about August Wilson's plays. We never talked about him in the context of having lived in Minnesota. Why? Why? I took a small break to make a list of people I needed to send my Leap Day card to. Yes, it's March. Leap Day has passed. Psh, we don't talk about that. I looked up my old order from 4 years ago because I still have some of those left. And I thought I should make sure I don't order too many. I already have 40 more people on my list this year than I ordered last time. And last time I was ordering for me and 2 other people. Leap Day cards coming for some of y'all. We'll see how that goes. I'm not on here to talk to you guys about Leap Day cards. I'm on here because I realized that I have not been very helpful in describing what I'm liking about the August Wilson book and what it's kind of about. And I am now 70 pages from the end. Some major themes are around authorship and control of your artistic work. The author talks a lot about how themes in August Wilson's plays are kind of echoed in his life, and conflict he had with some of his collaborators because he wanted to still be seen as the sole author of the work and he wanted creative control over things. He also recognizes the value of collaboration, in particular August Wilson, the way that he wrote his plays. He wanted to see it performed before he would cut it down. He wrote really long plays. He would either go to this special workshop called the O'Neill Workshop, or he would refine it in theaters through live performance. So he's using that live performance to inform what he does. It's really interesting to read about that and to read where this is echoed in his work and where it's not echoed in his work. And she brings a lot of insight. I don't know. I'm not explaining myself well. Lots of thoughts. I am going to go start chapter 17 now because in about 40 minutes, we need to get on the road to go to a restaurant that's kind of far away from my dad's birthday. A quick update for y'all in the morning from the one patch of shadow coming in from my window and with Catalina at my side. Last night, I finished August Wilson, A Life. It was good, y'all. Right now, I'm ranking it above Emperor of Rome. Sorry to everyone who likes Rome. But both of these books I went into not really knowing or having a big passion about the subject covered. I went into August Wilson with more trepidation than I did for Emperor of Rome because I don't always jive with biographies. But Patty Harrigan really sold me on August Wilson and the interesting aspects of his life. I think she had really interesting commentary about his art and how he approached things, and also like just this cycle of plays he decided to do and barely finished. Also interesting in the like acknowledgments at the end, there was a little note, or maybe just in the notes, there was a little note about how many things were paraphrased because this is an unauthorized biography and they could not use the direct quotes because they didn't have permission from the estate. So that was interesting to me. I've only finished 2 books, but I have finished 2 books, and it is March 3rd as of this morning. This is at the top of what I've read so far. I'm about to sleep on March 3rd, Sunday, March 3rd, and I have just barely started Wifedom, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. I picked this up next because I had a lot of questions around August Wilson's 3 wives, kind of hovering at the edges of his biography, and I was like, oh, this one is all about the wife of a famous artist. I wanted to see if it had the themes that I was curious about there. I was trepidatious when I opened it because it looked like the first chapter was 94 pages long, but it turns out that the table of contents only has the sections. So it has 4 sections, 3 sections and an epilogue, something like that. And each section is very long, but each section is subdivided. So I've read the first 3, and that's 13 pages. What I didn't realize is that the author is interspersing some memoir bits about how she got interested in Orwell's wife, and I'm not sure how much more she's going to go into it, but I did not realize that that was part of this book. I'll let you know when I've gotten further what I think. All right, y'all. It is like 7 a.m. on Saturday, the 9th of March. Did I say that I started Wifedom? I did. I'm this much in. I'm actually really enjoying it. A lot of the concerns I had about it end up being strengths. So 1, it's not 3 giant chapters. It's 3 sections that are split up into smaller chapters. Great. Much easier for reading. 2, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this like semi-memoir, semi-biographical style. Nope. I love it. I love how the author explains the decisions she's making and the way she's processing and feeling what she's learning as she goes, and then also shows a straightforward, more biographical path. I'm so excited that the books I was most worried about, or most I have no idea about of this, are so far doing well. And who knows, maybe I'll love Eve. But I really need to finish this because I have 3 more books after this. And all of this is happening while, hold on, let me switch my camera. While I am monitoring this hooligan and trying to get her to eat more food so she stops regurgitating her water. And also all of this is happening while, hold on. And also all of this is happening while I am quarantined from COVID exposure. But I'm really trying not to get COVID. Would really like to not get COVID, please. That's the scoop. That's what's happening today. At least when you're quarantined, you have plenty of time to read things. This is what quarantining from the rest of your house looks like. It means putting on a mask every time you leave your room for any reason. Hi, this is Lena, a little menace. Good news. I'm about 100 pages into Wifedom. I've gotten past the first section. It's about 1/4 of the way through. Still really enjoying it. I also think it was a really good choice for me and very interesting to read this after the August Wilson biography, because I think in some ways it's a little bit in conversation in my mind with that. Specifically, the author of this book, Anna Funder, is trying to argue that women get erased from important, famous, artistic men's lives. In reading the August Wilson biography, that biographer made a point of how Wilson himself tried to really establish his work as his own and his alone, even though he had very meaningful collaborations and collaborators. I wonder how much of the erasure is genuinely the ways that we don't value women's work and their roles in society versus how much society and individual quote-unquote genius creators, artistic people want to support this narrative of the lone genius versus what in actuality is often in collaboration. Something that I'm feeling so far is that I want a lot more people to read this and discuss it with me. Any good faith criticism of this book would be an interesting and engaging conversation to have. That's what I'm feeling right now, about 1/4 of the way through. Hello. If I look tired, it's because I stayed up late and finished Wifedom. I actually have been reading through some of the notes, skimming the notes in this, so I'm not completely done, but I have finished the book, the main text of this book, and I can talk about it a little now. I really was surprised by this book. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. It was not what I expected it to be. It's basically a book that is both a biography exploration of the life of George Orwell's first longest wife, an exploration of how she has been treated by other biographers of George Orwell, and also an examination by the author herself of how that sort of intersects with her own life as a writer. It's very interesting. It's very well written. I think that there are some things she doesn't maybe fully address within the text itself, but I think that's okay within the thesis she's putting forward. My main question now that I've finished it is I feel like I'm going to have to sit on this rating for a while, because I feel like the very end of the book maybe brought it back from a 5 to a 4 for me. This is going to sound so weird, but so much through this book, we are focused on this woman and also on the ways that she is excluded from George Orwell's life narrative, Eric Blair, his, non-pen name, by other biographers and by Eric himself. The focus is so entirely on her. And then at the very end of the book ends with the death of Eric, of George Orwell. And I think a little bit of this is necessary but at some point, that section starts to feel pretty long. Let me just check. Hold on. Okay, so that section ends up being 70 pages long. The actual text of this book is exactly 400 pages long. So in the end, 70 pages, which is, I did some math on my phone, is about 17.5%. It's 17.5%. So a little less than 18% of this book that's about George Orwell's wife ends up being about Eric specifically. I think we needed some of that because in some ways, a big point of this book is that the absence of Eileen tells us about Eileen. It tells us about where she's missing. It tells us about what she was doing. Other biographers and Eric himself wrote her out of the narrative. And so I think there's an aspect of Anna Funder trying to show that those 70 pages of her absence also tell us about her, but it just felt too long. There is like a 3-page thing after that section, so it tries to bring it back, but essentially the book feels like it ends with the death of Eric, and that makes it feel like the book is about Eric, about George Orwell, in a way that I think pulled away from at the last minute from some of the points that this was making. It diminished it a little bit in my view, but I would super love to discuss with someone else because I have a lot of thoughts about this book. And I think that's one of the things I really like about it. It feels like a lot to discuss, including the format. I have not talked about this yet, but the way that this is told, author basically is trying to find this person who was sort of written out of the narrative. But of course, she had her own life and things that she was doing. And so she shows up in other people's narratives. So the author looks in 3 places, essentially. She looks at letters that survive from Eileen to her friends where she talks about her life with George that have been published because of her connection to him. She also looks at the way that George does or does not write about his own wife in his work and the ways that his biographers do and do not write about her, largely do not write about her. Finally, she looks at other people who knew Eileen and what they've written and whether they've written her into their work. So personal memoirs, novels where they fictionalize versions of her. And she puts all of this together to make a picture of Eileen. Then she imagines what Eileen might have been thinking, feeling, doing in proximity to these things. This book is a combination of factual, we know that Eileen herself wrote this, we know that so-and-so said this about her, we know and so-and-so excluded her from this thing. And she's piecing those together. And then there are sections where she's imagining, and it's really well marked. I think that this kind of experimentation is a thing you can do in nonfiction when you are marking it really well. You're making it very clear that this is a thing that you are imagining she's thinking or seeing or doing and not the factual thing of what is happening. She also has sections where she talks about her own process. She talks about how she's feeling doing this, all of that. So that comes into it too. I think the style this is written really adds to this as a book. It makes it super compelling. I think it was great in this round. Quick note about reading the notes of Wifedom. These notes are done in a style that I don't always love in terms of like when you're reading, it's impossible to tell where there are notes. So there's no endnote indicators within the text. But I do think it's worth reading the footnotes. There's a lot contained in them that is useful and interesting, including a couple times in the text, the author references a poem that Eileen wrote before she ever met Eric, that she titled something 1984 that was about sort of dystopian future, and the actual text of that poem is in the notes of this book. There's other places where we find out, oh, this thing that's like a pretty significant detail about George Orwell being a sex pest in his real life. How did we not know that before? Well, some things we did not know because the people they happened to weren't talking about them until more recently. I don't always read the notes in a book, but in this book in particular, it is worth me skimming and reading the ones where there is more than just a citation. And now I get to pick what I'm starting next. The 3 I have left are The Exceptions, Sure I'll Join Your Cult by Maria Bamford, and Eve. And until just now, I was thinking I'm definitely going to pick up The Exceptions. I think it's the natural launching point after wifedom. But I think what I actually have to do is start reading both Eve and The Exceptions, because I'm very worried that this is going to be one that I'm going to have to force myself to read a chapter at a time, and I need to start now. I'm going to read a chapter of this today, and then I'm going to read as far as I can in The Exceptions. All right, I have come back from Dune. It doesn't look like I have moved because I'm back on the couch with my dogs, but I have. And before I left to see Dune 2, I read the introduction preface thing for Eve. And I both feel like it might be different than I thought, and also at the same time might have the same problems that I was worried about. So I'm going to talk about those. This book is actually reminding me a little bit of Up to Speed, which I read 2 chapters of earlier this year, and then it got automatically recalled to the library, and I'm just waiting in line again. And that one is about the dearth of research for women athletes. Each chapter is a different area. Eve is, as far as I can tell, was inspired in a similar way by this research gap there is between research about cis men and research for everyone else. The author is coming from the standpoint of what do we know about the female sex, not gender. She's very clear in her introduction that gender and sex are different things. And this book is about how things that we associate with the female sex developed over time. The first chapter is about lactation. Each chapter is about a different thing. They're roughly in the timeline of when we think that they would have developed according to current evolutionary theory. The concern that I have with this, even in just the introduction, which is about 23 pages, I already worry a lot about how much the focus of this book feels like it's going to be on the nature of women and what the female sex specifically means, and in a way that is so focused that it might feel a little alienating. I'm hoping that there's more nuance than the introduction led me to believe. I'm bummed now that I didn't finish Up to Speed, which I think was also published last year, so it's interesting that these books kind of get published together in little clumps, and then one of them made it into the awards. My current goal is to try to read 2 chapters every 3 days, because that feels like it might be the realistic way to do things. But right now, instead of doing that, I'm going to power through as much of The Exceptions as I can. So we'll see how that goes. Sorry for the munching in the background. That's Thule, and I've lured her up here with me because she's so snowy right now because it's snowing. We just went to the park. The park was not plowed. Then we did some shoveling of the driveway. It is all very snowy. I haven't updated you in a couple days, so I wanted to update you. It is Tuesday, March 26th, so I have 4 days left. And here's where I'm at. I finished The Exceptions 2 nights ago. It really picks up the pace, has kind of up to a fast ending. I was alternately horrified and enraptured by reading this book. I wanted to figure out how well this will stick in my feelings. I think the author did the best that she could with the actual real-life circumstances she was describing. I really appreciate... Where are you going, Toolbean? You want to come say hi? Want to come say hi? This is Thule. She's lovely. She's lovely. I think the author did the best that she could with the actual real life circumstances she's dealing with. And I really deeply appreciate that at the end, this book was not like, yay, we've defeated workplace discrimination based on sex and like sexism is over, because it's not. And this book did not say it was. But I have read books before that have been like, yay, we defeated this thing. And I'll look at the world and be like, really? You did? So she did not do that. And I did really appreciate that. But ultimately, the ending ends up feeling
both interesting and disappointing at the same time. Interesting because one of the things that happens is the main person that she's following, Nancy Hopkins, has the opportunity to potentially sue the school for something that happened around a course that she developed that was then stolen and turned into a textbook by some men. Nancy is deciding whether to pursue the lawsuit and kind of alienate the process they have going on, or continue the process and run past the statute of limitations and lose that opportunity to have that lawsuit. I think it was interesting because ultimately it showed that Nancy was able to accomplish more of what she actually wanted out of the situation, working within the system, because she had sympathetic leaders at the top. The book is not about working within the system because it points out how unique that situation was, how many other women at many other schools have tried to do the same thing and have not had the support of administration. This is sort of the exception. The thing that was frustrating, though, as a reader, was reading all of these accounts of just extremely frustrating disrespect, and knowing that the men who did that didn't have any consequences. I'm thinking again about many of the things I angrily texted my friends about when I was reading this. Y'all, like the hot goss that I got about this book by reading the acknowledgments. Oh, sorry, it's not in the acknowledgments. It's in a note on sources. The original MIT report that Nancy wrote in 1996 has never been made public and is not available in any archive. And Nancy did not give me access to that. She and Bob Bergenow insisted that it remain classified as it was based on confidential interviews and contains data easily traceable to specific individuals. I obtained a copy of that report independently. Sorry, I don't know how much of that I'll keep in. But right now, what I'm feeling is I think I'm going to slap this in right behind Wifedom and right above August Wilson, A Life. I really liked it, even more than I expected to. The things I was afraid of were not ultimately true. And I am really glad that I read this book, and I have recommended it to a couple friends already. I don't think it's for everyone, but I do think it can be really interesting and maybe validating if you are like a white woman in academia. I mean, the hard thing is the author does sort of acknowledge this, that things were even harder for people with double marginalizations, women of color. It's just not part of the story that she's telling here because she's writing about this specific memo. I just spent too long telling you how I felt about the exceptions. I'm actually in earnest reading Eve. I finished the first chapter last night, and I have such mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it's a lot more compelling and interesting than I thought it would be. I have learned some very interesting fun facts about breastfeeding. At the same time, the concern I actually had when I was reading the introduction has carried over, in that I feel like it is extremely hard to write a book that is so deeply about genetic sex and development over time and not feel like it becomes kind of gender essentialist. Even though the author tries really hard, she specifically says in the introduction that gender and sex are not the same thing. She had a little part in the first chapter where she talked about trans men and trans women and whether or not they could breastfeed. So that was interesting. She's trying. At the same time, it feels so extremely nature over nurture, and anything that varies is just because of epigenetics, kind of. It's the feeling that I'm getting from it. I'm going to try to keep reading it because I've read one of like 8 chapters so far. I'm like 12% in. I have so much to read in only 4 days. So I'm going to have to read, 2 chapters a day from now until Saturday when I have to vote. But I also need to start my final book, which is the comedian one. I was hoping, the Maria Bamford memoir, I was hoping that my hold on the audiobook would come through before the end of the month. I live in Minnesota, so of course it has not, because that hold list is very long. That's where we are so far, and I'm feeling hopeful that so far, I don't think this is going to be 6. It might be 5th. It might be 4th. I don't know. We'll see if it can crack the top 3. The author really writes in a very accessible, fun way. She does this thing where in each section, she's trying to do, the first Eve that had this trait, which is weird in the way that it sounded. And some of that works for me and some of it does not work for me. I love her footnotes. She has great footnotes. It gives me Mary Roach, but more scientific vibes, or not more scientific, but more academic. Mary Roach, but more academic vibes. I will talk to y'all later. Say bye, Tuli. Bye. Hello, I'm going to see how fast I can talk. It is Friday, the 29th of March. Yesterday, I got my 48-hour notice and panicked because I had not finished either of my 2 remaining books yet. Last night and at lunchtime today, I finished Sure, I'll Join Your Cult by Maria Bamford. It's funny because this is going to end up in my bottom 2. I think maybe as 6th, but I'm not sure. I'm not that totally surprised because Maria Bamford writes in kind of her comedy style, and it is not necessarily for me. So the first part of this book I actually struggled with more, and then as she got to her adult life and more recent years, I found it more interesting and intriguing. I thought the things she was writing about and how she was writing about them were more distinct to me, but I just don't think that this book is going to stick out in my memory. It was not particularly interesting to me. I think you have to like Maria Bamford to like the book, or potentially relate more to the content of the book. That's how I feel about it. It's funny though, I went into this round kind of excited because 2 of the 20 books that I had voted on were in this round, and those 2 are currently in my bottom 2 positions. What I really need to do is finish this, so I know where to rate it. I have not gotten very far at all. I'm in the middle of the 2nd chapter. I do think that this is working for me better than Emperor of Rome, and certainly better than Sure, I'll Join Your Cult. I just have to get more into it so I can figure out whether or not it's working for me better than the August Wilson biography or not. That is what I'm doing right now. That is where I'm at. It is chaos. It's always chaos at the end here. I can't talk too long because I need to be reading. I don't know if I've mentioned before kind of how I'm feeling about this. The problem is I'm taking notes and I'm also talking to you and I can't remember what I put where. This is both surprising me in the ways that it's really accessible, a little bit funny, excellent footnotes, and at the same time, like meeting the expectations I had where there's aspects of it that just don't totally work. They're just a little too out there for me personally as a reader. And when it comes down to it, I'm not very far in, so maybe this will change because the first chapter is about mammary glands and the second chapter is about the womb, which both just feel so your nature defining your path. All right, that's all I'm saying for now because I need to go read. Bye.
Hello, it is March 30th. We had to submit our votes today, so I thought I would do a little wrap up for y'all. This will not actually be the end of the video, which you'll hear about in a little bit, but it'll be very close to the end, and I'm going to let you know where I ranked things. Here's your last chance to guess, based on what I've said previously, where everything sorted out. I did already kind of tell you what I was thinking as I went, so you should have a pretty good guess. Okay, coming in at number 6, Sure, I'll Join Your Cult by Maria Bamford. I do kind of wish I had managed to get this one on audiobook because I think maybe it would have worked a little bit better read by the author herself. I think this is just a really, Maria's style and tone and voice works for you or it doesn't, and it did not work for me. I don't think this is going to move on. It feels a little like unfair to rank something just on tone, but I think when it comes down to it, you got to sort the book somehow. Next, I will just put a symbolic picture of the cover up, is going to be Emperor of Rome, which is the 2 books of this group that I happen to vote for. So, clearly I did a great job this year. I think this one was really a me problem in that I don't think it was poorly written, but ultimately I just don't care about the Emperors of Rome. I'm sorry. And part of why I voted for it is when I was reading like reviews and I was trying to decide what to vote for, I was tricked into thinking it would connect more, that the author would connect it more to the modern day. And then accurately, I was thinking this is not men who think about Rome all the time's view, like Rome bros view of Rome. This is a more realistic historical look at the good, the bad, the ugly, what they made up and what that tells us about themselves and ourselves. I think it is that second thing. I think the author did very little to connect it to the modern day. Ultimately, maybe doing that would have dated this book more, and maybe this book is more timeless the way it's written. But I personally don't really care about Rome. It just ended up as 5th for me. That does not mean this is a bad book. This is shockingly the best Oktafinals I have ever had. I always joke that there's at least one stinker in every Oktafinals. None of these were stinkers. All of them were well written. All of them were interesting to someone out there. There is no book in this stack that I would say no one should read this. All of these books have an audience. I just was not the audience for Emperor of Rome. This one I thought about the most, and this is why this is not the end of this, because as you can see, I did not actually make it through the end of Eve before I had to vote. It's a big faux pas. I should not do that. I hate not having finished this, so I am planning to still finish Eve, and I will come back and let you know if my thoughts changed or not. I was really struggling with whether to place this as third or fourth. I do think there's a lot of good things about it, and I think if I keep... This is the one where I'm like, maybe my opinion will change as I keep reading it because of the way it's formatted and structured and the fact that the first 2 chapters are what they are. But ultimately, when it came down to it, this is going to sound so strange because of how I've talked about this book throughout. But I decided that this was fourth and my third was third because I'll just show you my third. My third was August Wilson, A Life by Patty Hartigan. And I think I've mentioned before, biography is just really hard to work for me. In the past, I've had to read several biographies for this award, and it is just the way that biographies are supposed to be written comes off as a little dry to me, and it has rarely worked for me. It worked for me with Red Comet, actually, which is the longest book I've ever had to read for these awards, and it worked for me here with August Wilson, and it might be a little biased because he's lived in St. Paul for a long time, and there are tons of cute little cameos of Minnesota things, but ultimately why this I put as third and Eve as fourth is that when it comes down to it, Eve is a science book. And actually, I would say this is in the vein of things like Sentient, although Sentient was actually terrible, and this is not, or An Immense World. And in fact, the author in the notes, because that's why there's 2 bookmarks, I was reading the notes as I'm going, the author does cite one of Ed Yong's other books, I Contain Multitudes, and I think that this is really in the vein of those, where each chapter covers a different trait or different thing, and the author goes through kind of the history of where we think it came from, what we know about it, where we think it's going. Science books usually work for me. They don't work for me the way they do for every judge, but they tend to work for me better than biographies do. And biographies it is such a struggle to sell me on a biography. And so I ended up giving this one the edge over Eve because it sold me on a biography of a person who I knew so little about that I misattributed which plays this person had written before I started reading the book. That's why this got the edge for me. Do I think August Wilson is going to beat Eve overall in this ranking? No, I fully expect this to make it forward tomorrow. If it doesn't make it and I finish reading it and I feel like after I finish it, I should have ranked it higher, will I feel guilty? Maybe, I guess. I don't know. I'll let you know in the next clip, but I'm confident this is going to make it on without me. And I think for me, it was more impressive to write a biography that I personally thought was interesting and compelling than it is to write a science book that I found interesting and compelling in some parts, but also I struggled with in some parts personally, which means that my final 2 books should not really be a surprise to any of you who've been watching this vlog. They are The Exceptions by Kate Zernike in second and Wifedom by Anna Funder in first. This book was such a brilliant surprise. I just truly enjoyed reading it so much. It had so many interesting things and had such an interesting approach to telling them. Even this idea of women being written out of the histories of their famous husbands and rewriting them into that was so interesting. My only complaint with this is the way it ended. Bring the focus again back to George and not Eileen. That is such a small quibble for how great I think this book was, and I honestly think this is the only one in my group that has a chance of making it I think it's going to make it to the semifinals and not the finals. That's my prediction now. Wild, I know. The Exceptions I really enjoyed. It's a slightly more traditional, straightforward story, but I think that the author did such a good job avoiding the rah-rah girl boss pitfall she could have fallen into and really being realistic about what these women were able to accomplish and were not able to accomplish. I think the only thing, again, that was a little bit of a weakness for me in this book was that I think the author did a great job accurately representing what happened at the ending, but it was a little bit of a letdown. I would recommend this highly to many people. I have so many friends I'm going to tell to read this, and now that I can actually talk about this book, I'm going to be recommending it to so many people because it is so interesting, and I want to discuss this book with other people. By far, these 2 are the books that I will think about the most after these awards, and this book in particular is the one that I think I will think about in the years to come. See you shortly in a clip of me in the future, hopefully not too long in the future. Me in the future, I hope that I had the same opinion of it then as I do now, and I can tell you all about it and all about my final thoughts. Caitlin of the future, go.
Okay, I'm reading the brain chapter. Sorry, I'm sick and I'm losing my voice. I'm reading the brain chapter and just in a little moment of synergy that sometimes happens in these groups that are randomly assigned. The author here mentions the way that James Watson describes Rosalind Franklin in his memoir about discovering the DNA double helix, and that was a big turning point in the exceptions. I thought that was interesting. I'll have more thoughts on both the tools and brain chapter when I finish them, but I just wanted to interject that now. I have at least 2 chapters left in Eve, maybe 3. I know for sure I have voice, ironically, and I have love, and I'm not sure if there's one in between those, and it is currently holding my soup that I'm about to eat for dinner, so I can't check for you. But I have finished reading Tools and Brain, and these are the first 2 chapters I feel like I've really looked at socialization more in them, more so in Brain than in Tools. But Tools, interestingly, Tools is largely about the idea of having to like cooperatively give birth, like having midwives or other kind of help and assistance giving birth because of how challenging human births are. It's not what I expected from that chapter. The Brain chapter has a huge section at the end about socialization. Can a woman's brain be a typical woman's brain without being steeped in all of the social things that girlhood produces? And at the same time, the author is very clear that like trans women's brains also have to go through feelings of challenge in gender and other things. So the author is still really working to be trans inclusive in this book. I appreciated that the author finally actually talked about socialization. It was nice for her to say, hey, your circumstances, your environment, the society that we live in also shapes us and who we are and how we develop. The most interesting fun fact from the Brain chapter, I think, is that people who go through pregnancy go through a unique elastic time in their brain. So like your brains are elastic during adolescence and then become more set. This is me badly summarizing. If you are a person with a uterus who then goes through a pregnancy that makes it to the 3rd trimester, and then the like 3 or so months after birth, your brain goes through one more of these like huge, they called it like pruning and growth phases. So like stuff genuinely gets like sort of semi-shut down in parts of the 3rd trimester. After you give birth, you have this huge like growth and connection. I think that's what it was telling to me. I thought that was very interesting. And I think the author did a fairly good job handling, this is a thing that only happens to people who go through this specific experience. People who don't make it to the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, like do not go through that experience. And that is okay. That does not make them less of women. It's just a difference in how their brain is. I'm going to eat this soup now and then hopefully read at least one more chapter today. Hi, I'm making lunch, so if you hear the sizzling sound, that's what it is. Hello, it's me again, and I am reading the notes section for the chapter on voice in Eve. And I don't know if I've extolled the virtue of reading the notes section of this book. When I read nonfiction, I don't always read the notes because oftentimes they're just citations, but this is not just citations. If I think there's more meat, I will read the notes, and this one has a lot of meat in the notes. So for example, we just had this chapter about voice and language and the development of language. There was a whole section on what the author calls, and she did not just make this up, other people call it this as well, motherese, which is basically baby talk, like when you're talking to your dog or children and you're like, who's a good baby? Oh, and you like go up in pitch. I can't do it well right now because my voice is still weird because I'm still sick. In the notes, she has a section where she talks about how in same-sex couples, there's not a disadvantage in kids who are being raised and like their speech patterns and stuff, even though in the chapter she was talking about how advantageous this like baby talk is to language development in children, because they probably use baby talk too. That is an ode to the notes section of this book. It's very interesting. It adds a lot of context. That's where I'm at in terms of this book. I have 2 chapters left because I forgot, of course, the penultimate chapter is about menopause. Okay, y'all. It is Sunday the 21st. And I have finally finished Eve. I thought I would finish it earlier, but I went on a little bit of a rabbit trail investigating one of the citations in here, and I actually ended up emailing the author about it. So if I hear back, I will let you know in here, but just no rabbit trail related to a mention of Minnesota, because as y'all know by watching this video, anytime Minnesota comes up, I am immediately interested. I don't want to go off on that rabbit trail in this video because I think I finally coalesced my main complaint about this book. And I also feel a little silly about this being my main complaint about this book because I should have known going in. I think my expectations for this book were wrong. And in some ways I was surprised in a good way. And in some ways I was just not thinking through the implications of a book that is about how the female body drove 200 million years of human evolution. AKA, this book is about
the evolution of the human species through the lens of biologically female bodies. And if you have studied, know anything about evolution, you know that the thing that matters, the one thing that matters in evolution is whether you reproduce, whether your genes are passed on to the next generation. It should not have been such a shock or surprise to me that so much of this book ends up being focused on motherhood. But in the end, that's what frustrated me a lot. A lot of the focus is on motherhood, the same way that our culture focuses on motherhood. The author, I think, very unintentionally echoes some of the language that those spaces use, but instead of using the same justification that they do, she uses science as the justification and evolution as the justification. Ultimately, to me personally, the focus on motherhood in this book was frustrating, the ways that the author was communicating it. I think my problem with this book is very specific to me. I think that a lot of people will not have that problem with this book. I think Kat Mahanan didn't know how to not write that way because she doesn't know enough about the background that I am bringing to reading this book, because she's not in those subcultures. It is why it was very frustrating to me personally. As I entered this last chapter, I thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have rated this 4. Maybe I should have bumped it up to 3. But then as I was getting into the chapter, I was like, maybe I should have had this 5. Like, it's so frustrating. And Emperor of Rome at least had all this other stuff. I think ultimately what I'm coming down to, and a lot of this is probably just justification, you know? I ranked it 4th, and now I have to live with that. But I do actually think for me personally that 4th is the right place for this book for all the reasons I've talked about at length in this video. If you had this group, if you read any of those books and you disagree with my take or you agree with my take, please let me know down below. My favorite part of judging for these awards is really dialoguing with other judges, other people who've read these books, and finding out where we had similar opinions and where we differed. That is what I will say, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye.